the Pacific Coast Highway is not just a road. It is a ribbon of asphalt that hugs the edge of a continent, a place where the land meets the sea in a long, dramatic embrace. It is the dream road of America, a stretch of highway that has inspired songs, movies, road trips, and the very idea of freedom itself. But how did this road become so iconic? How did a simple route number, California State Route 1, transform into a symbol of wanderlust and adventure? The answer lies in the land, the people, and the relentless pursuit of a vision that seemed impossible. Let us begin at the beginning. Before there was a highway, there were only trails used by the native peoples of California, the Chumash, the Ohlone, the Miwok, and many others. They walked along the coast for thousands of years, following the seasons and the salmon runs, the migrations of birds and deer. Their paths were narrow and winding, following the contours of the cliffs and the beaches. The Spanish arrived in the 18th century, building missions along the coast, connecting them with crude roads that were little more than dirt tracks. The Camino Real, the King's Highway, linked the missions from San Diego to Sonoma, but it ran inland, not along the rugged coastline. The coast itself remained wild and inaccessible, broken by steep bluffs and rocky headlands, with only a few small harbors like Monterey and San Francisco. The first real steps toward a coastal highway came with the California Gold Rush in 1849. Thousands of people poured into the state, and they needed ways to move goods and people along the coast. A few stagecoach lines operated on rough roads, but they were slow and dangerous. In the 1870s, the railroads arrived, and they followed the easier inland routes. The coast remained a backwater, a place of quiet farming and fishing communities. But a new invention was changing the world: the automobile. In the early 1900s, automobiles were a novelty for the rich, but they quickly became a symbol of progress. People wanted to drive for pleasure, to see the country, and especially to see the Pacific Ocean. The idea of a road along the California coast was first proposed in 1910 by a group of auto enthusiasts in San Francisco. They called it the Coast Highway, and they imagined a scenic drive that would rival the great roads of Europe. But building such a road would require cutting through some of the most treacherous terrain in North America, including the Big Sur coast, a stretch of 60 miles where the Santa Lucia Mountains plunge straight into the Pacific. It was a place of fog and crashing waves, of landslides and sheer cliffs. Many people thought it was impossible. One man who believed it was possible was a civil engineer named James McCullough. He worked for the California Highway Commission, and in 1915, he surveyed the Big Sur coast on foot and on horseback. His reports described a landscape of breathtaking beauty, but also of immense difficulty. He wrote that building a road here would be like building a road through the clouds. Yet he also wrote that the effort would be worth it because there was nothing else like it on Earth. The state legislature was impressed enough to allocate a small amount of money for preliminary surveys, but World War I put everything on hold. After the war, the dream of a coastal highway revived with new energy. Cars were becoming cheaper and more reliable. The Model T Ford made car ownership possible for millions of people. Road trips became a national pastime. In 1919, a young lieutenant colonel named Dwight Eisenhower participated in a cross-country convoy that took 2 months to cross the United States because the roads were so bad. That experience planted a seed that would later lead to the interstate highway system, but that was still decades away. In the meantime, the states were building their own highways. In California, the push for a coastal highway was led by a group called the California State Automobile Association. They printed maps and brochures showing the proposed route, and they encouraged their members to write to their legislators. The big obstacle was the cost. Building a road along the Big Sur coast would require blasting tunnels through solid rock, building bridges across deep canyons, and constructing retaining walls on slopes that seemed to defy gravity. The estimated cost in 1919 was $10 million, a staggering sum at the time. But the Auto Association did not give up. They hired a photographer named Frederick W. Haas to take pictures of the coastline from the deck of a ship. The pictures showed a wild and empty land that seemed to call out for a road. They were published in newspapers and magazines across the state, and the public began to dream of driving along those cliffs. The state legislature finally approved a bond issue in 1921 for $5 million, but it was not enough. Construction began in earnest in 1922, but it was slow and expensive. The first section of the highway was built from San Francisco south to the town of Carmel, which was already a popular artist colony. The road passed through the redwood forests of the Santa Cruz Mountains and then dropped down to the coast at Monterey. This part was relatively easy, and it opened in 1923 to great fanfare. People drove down from San Francisco to see the seals at Point Lobos and the famous golf course at Pebble Beach. But beyond Carmel, the road ended. To the south lay the Big Sur wilderness, a land of mile-high mountains and sea stacks and waterfalls that fell directly into the ocean. The locals called it the Wild Coast, and only the hardiest travelers attempted to get there on foot or by horseback. The man who would finally conquer the Big Sur coast was named John L. Maher, a contractor who had built roads in the Sierra Nevada and the Mojave Desert. He was a burly Irishman with a thick mustache and a love for cheap cigars. In 1927, he won the contract to build the next section of the highway from Carmel to the mouth of the Big Sur River. It was a small contract, but it was the beginning of a decades-long obsession. Maher set up his camp at the mouth of the canyon, and his crews began the work of cutting a road into the cliffs. They used dynamite to blast ledges out of the rock, and they used mules and horse-drawn wagons to haul away the debris. The workers lived in tents, and they often had to lower themselves down the cliffs on ropes to set the dynamite charges. It was dangerous work, and accidents were common. Several men died, but Maher kept pushing forward. He was determined to build the road that everyone called impossible. The big challenge was the section from Big Sur Village south to the public campground at Pfeiffer Beach. The cliffs here were almost vertical, and the only way to build a road was to cut a shelf into the rock face, like a balcony hanging over the ocean. Maher devised a system of suspended scaffolding, with men working from baskets lowered by derricks. They drilled holes into the granite and then drove steel rods into the rock to create a foundation for the roadway. The work was slow, sometimes advancing only a few feet per day. At the same time, the state was building bridges across the deep canyons that cut through the mountains. The most famous of these is the Bixby Creek Bridge, a graceful concrete arch that spans a gorge 300 feet deep. It was designed by a young engineer named C. H. Purcell, and it was the longest concrete arch bridge in the world when it was completed in 1932. The bridge became an icon of the highway, a symbol of human ingenuity conquering nature. But building it was a nightmare. The crews had to haul tons of concrete and steel down a narrow, winding road that had been carved out of the mountain. They built a temporary cableway to move materials across the canyon, and they worked in all kinds of weather, often in fog so thick you could not see your own hand. The Great Depression hit in 1929, and the state of California ran out of money for the highway. Construction stopped for a year, and Maher had to lay off his workers. But the federal government stepped in with emergency relief funds. The highway was declared a federal relief project, and thousands of unemployed men came to work on the road. They were paid 30 cents an hour, plus room and board and work camps run by the U.S. Army. The work continued through the worst years of the Depression. By 1934, the highway had been pushed south to a place called Gorda, a tiny settlement perched on a cliff where the road turned inland toward the town of Morro Bay. This was a major milestone because it connected the Big Sur coast to the rest of the state for the first time. On June 15, 1934, a parade of cars gathered at the Gorda schoolhouse to celebrate the opening of the highway. The governor of California, Frank Merriam, came to cut the ribbon, but the ribbon was a real problem. The official ribbon had gotten lost in the mail, so the locals used a clothesline tied between two cars. When the governor cut it with a pair of garden shears, the crowd cheered. Then they drove down the new road for the first time. The road was not finished yet. It was only 18 feet wide, with no guardrails and no shoulders. The surface was gravel, and in some places it was so narrow that cars had to pull over to let each other pass. When it rained, the road turned into a river of mud. Landslides were common, and sometimes the road was blocked for weeks. But it was open, and people came from all over the country to drive it. They called it the most beautiful road in the world. The opening of the highway was also the beginning of a new kind of tourism. Small inns and restaurants began to appear along the coast. The most famous of them was the Nepenthe restaurant in Big Sur. which was built in 1949 on the site of a former homestead. Nepenthe means forgetfulness in Greek, and the owners wanted their customers to forget their troubles and enjoy the view. The restaurant became a gathering place for writers and artists, including Henry Miller, Jack Kerouac, and Robinson Jeffers. They were drawn to the wild beauty of the coast, and they wrote about it in books and poems that spread the fame of the highway even further. During World War II, the highway was closed to the public for a time because the military used it to train troops for amphibious landings. The beaches of Big Sur were ideal for practicing beach assaults, and soldiers from Fort Ord marched along the highway with full packs. After the war, the highway was improved with a new surface of asphalt and wider lanes. The state also built the first guardrails and turned the road into a two-lane paved highway. By 1950, it was ready for the Great American Road Trip. And what a road trip it was! The Pacific Coast Highway became the quintessential American road trip, a journey that every car enthusiast dreamed of taking. It was not just the scenery, though that was spectacular. It was the feeling of being on the edge, of driving on a road that seemed to float between the mountains and the sea. It was the smell of the salt air and the eucalyptus trees, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks, the sight of the sun setting over the Pacific Ocean in a blaze of orange and purple. It was a road that demanded you slow down, that forced you to stop at every turnout to take a picture or just to stare. The highway also became a symbol of freedom, especially for young people in the 1960s. Jack Kerouac wrote about driving the coast in his novel On the Road, though his characters took the more inland Route 66. But it was the 1960s counterculture that really adopted the Pacific Coast Highway. The beat poets and the hippies traveled up and down the coast, living in vans and Volkswagen buses, camping in state parks, and dropping acid at the Esalen Institute, a retreat in Big Sur that became a center of the human potential movement. The highway was their escape from the conformity of suburban America. In the 1970s, the highway gained even more fame from movies and television. The opening scene of the 1974 thriller, The Long Goodbye, features a drive along the coast with the protagonist, Philip Marlowe, looking out at the ocean. But the most famous film connection is probably the 1991 movie Thelma and Louise, where the two women drive their convertible through the desert and then into the mountains, ending up at the Grand Canyon. That movie did not actually use the Pacific Coast Highway, but it captured the spirit of the open road that the highway represents. Television shows like Route 66, which was actually about a different road, nevertheless inspired people to get in their cars and drive. And then there was the music. The Beach Boys sang about California girls and surfing, and they sang about driving down the coast. The 1970s song, Ventura Highway, by America, is about the road that runs from Los Angeles to Ventura, part of the Pacific Coast Highway. It captures the feeling of a lazy summer day with the windows down and the wind in your hair. The 1980s and 1990s brought more improvements to the highway, including the replacement of the old bridges and the addition of passing lanes in some sections. But there was also a growing awareness of the environmental impact of the road. The highway cuts through several state parks and 2 national forests, and it runs along the edge of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. The wildlife includes gray whales, sea otters, and the California condor. In the 1990s, environmental groups began to advocate for the protection of the coastline from overdevelopment. One of the biggest controversies came in the early 2000s when a developer wanted to build a large resort on the Big Sur coast. Locals opposed it, and after years of legal battles, the state bought the land and added it to the nearby state park. The highway remains a working road, but it is also a protected scenic highway. In 2003, it was designated a National Scenic Byway, which means it receives federal funds for preservation, but also must adhere to strict guidelines for maintaining its scenic character. Today, the Pacific Coast Highway is more popular than ever. About 3 million people drive it each year, many of them from Europe and Asia who have seen pictures of the road in magazines and online. The highway has become a bucket list item, a journey that people plan for years. The most famous section is still the Big Sur coast, a stretch of 26 miles that includes the Bixby Creek Bridge, the McWay Falls, and the many state parks. In the summer, the highway is crowded with RVs and rental cars, and the parking lots at the overlooks are packed. In the winter, the crowds thin out, and the road can be empty and lonely in the fog and rain. But the highway is not just a tourist attraction. It is also a lifeline for the communities along the coast. Towns like Monterey, Carmel, Big Sur, and Morro Bay depend on the highway for commerce and transportation. The people who live there have a love-hate relationship with the road. They love the beauty, but they hate the traffic and the occasional landslides that close the road for days or weeks. One of the most dramatic landslides happened in 2017 when a section of the highway near Mud Creek collapsed, dumping an estimated 1 million cubic yards of dirt and rock onto the beach below. The road was closed for over a year while engineers built a new bridge that bypasses the unstable slope. The project cost $54 million and involved drilling steel piles 60 feet deep into the bedrock. The new bridge was completed in 2018, and it is a testament to the continuing struggle to keep the road open against the forces of nature. The future of the Pacific Coast Highway is uncertain. Climate change is causing sea levels to rise and storms to become more severe. The coastline is eroding, and some sections of the road are already threatened. The state of California is planning for the long term, but there are no easy solutions. The highway cannot be moved inland because the mountains are too steep. The only option is to keep repairing and reinforcing the road as the land crumbles around it. But despite all the challenges, the dream road endures. It endures because of the people who love it. The road has a way of getting into your blood, of making you want to drive it again and again. I remember the first time I drove the Pacific Coast Highway. I was in my early 20s, and I was driving a beat-up old Honda Civic that I had bought for $200. I started in San Francisco, and I drove south, not really knowing what to expect. The fog was thick as I crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, but as I got past Monterey, the fog lifted and the sun came out. I saw the ocean for the first time that day, and it was like a revelation. The water was so blue it hurt my eyes, and the cliffs were so steep that I felt like I was driving off the edge of the world. I stopped at Bixby Creek Bridge and walked across it, peering down into the canyon. The wind was strong, and the roar of the waves below was like a low rumble. I took a picture with my cheap camera, and I thought about the men who built this bridge, the men who hung from ropes and poured concrete in the fog. They did it for the same reason that people now drive this road: to see something beautiful, to be part of something larger than themselves. I continued south, through Big Sur, past the Point Sur Lighthouse, past the turnoff to Ezelin, past the imposing cone of Cone Peak. I stopped at a small diner on the side of the road, and I ordered a burger and a milkshake. The waitress was an old woman with gray hair and a friendly smile. She asked me where I was from, and I told her I was just driving, that I had no destination. She nodded and said, "This road will take you where you need to go." I drove until the sun began to set, and then I pulled over at a turnout to watch. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, and the ocean caught the colors and turned into a mirror. I sat on the hood of my car, and I thought about all the people who had come before me, all the travelers and dreamers and visionaries who had built this road and driven this road. I felt like I was part of a tradition, part of a story that was still being written. And that is what the Pacific Coast Highway is, at its heart. It is a story. It is a story of a land that is both beautiful and dangerous, of a people who refuse to accept the impossible, of a road that became a symbol of freedom and adventure. It is a story that continues to unfold with every turn of the wheel, with every mile of the journey. The highway is not just a route from point A to point B, it is a destination in itself. It is a place where you can lose yourself and find yourself again. It is a road that teaches you to slow down, to pay attention, to look at the world around you. It is a road that reminds you that the journey is more important than the destination. As the years go by, the road will change. Landslides will reshape the coastline. Bridges will need to be replaced. The people who live there will grow old and new people will come, but the essence of the road will remain the same. The sound of the waves will still crash against the cliffs. The fog will still roll in from the sea. The sun will still set over the Pacific, and people will still drive the Pacific Coast Highway, searching for something, maybe not knowing what, but knowing that they will find it on the road. I think about the future, and I imagine a young person, maybe my granddaughter, driving the same road in a car that flies or runs on hydrogen or whatever fuel the future uses. She will look out at the same ocean and the same cliffs, and she will feel the same wonder that I felt. She might not know the names of the engineers who built the highway or the poets who sang its praises, but she will feel the spirit of the road. She will understand that it is more than just a road. It is a dream, and dreams do not fade. They are passed down from generation to generation, like a map that never wears out. The dream of the Pacific Coast Highway is the dream of a road that connects us to the natural world, a road that reminds us of our own smallness and our own greatness. It is a dream of freedom, of movement, of the open road. And as long as the road exists, the dream will live on. So if you ever have the chance to drive the Pacific Coast Highway, do not rush. Take your time. Stop at every overlook. Breathe in the salt air. Let the waves drown out the noise of your life. And remember that you are not just driving a road. You are driving a part of America. You are driving a dream. The Dream Road began as a vision in the minds of a few pioneers. It was built by the sweat and courage of thousands of workers. It was celebrated by artists and writers. And it is now loved by millions of people around the world. It is a road that has earned its place in the American imagination, a road that will never be forgotten. I could go on about the specific details of the construction, the people, the ecology, but the story of the Pacific Coast Highway is ultimately a story of how a simple road became a symbol of everything we love about travel. It became a place where the land meets the sea and where our hopes meet the horizon. So the next time you see a picture of the Bixby Creek Bridge or the rocky cliffs of Big Sur, remember that behind that image is a century of struggle and dream. Remember the men who hung from ropes, the women who ran the inns, the poets who found inspiration in the fog. And remember that the road is still there, waiting for you to drive it. This is the Pacific Coast Highway. This is America's dream road. And the journey is never over.